As chair of the Faculty Senate, it is certainly a pleasure, an honor, and an opportunity to welcome you here today to this, what I describe as auspicious moment. And I hope the time that you've taken from other activities that you could have been pursuing will be worth it at the end. Let me also mention that the Livingston family is not able to be here today, but Cleve Livingston has sent his regrets about not being here. And he also said, and I quote here, please convey my family's congratulations to Dr. Miller on her selection to be this year's speaker, and my personal regret that I will not be able to attend. And I'm doing that just now. It is now my privilege and honor to introduce to you Dr. Mark Stoner from the College of Arts and Letters, who will introduce our guests for this evening. Dr. Stoner.
Thank you. Well, I'm honored to introduce my colleague and dear friend of over a quarter of a century, Dr. Christine Miller, as the 2015-2016 Livingston Lecturer. The Livingston Lecture is an important event celebrating the life of Jack Livingston by honoring individuals who carry on his legacy. Professor Livingston's influence was profound in the formation of this campus as a place where people continually work on the humane projects of developing knowledge, character, and citizenship. Professor Miller's career has emulated Jack Livingston's values, but in her own distinctive manner. Since our offices have been next door to each other for over a decade, we've had opportunity to talk about teaching, and I've always been impressed with her concern for facilitating student learning. She takes her role of instructor very seriously and works hard to teach creatively and effectively. Her commitment to knowledge creation is evident in her research record, too. I don't think she's gotten sufficient recognition for her important work in the study of visual rhetoric and communication. It's pretty clear today that mediated communication is quite visual in nature, and it begs the sort of analysis that she does. And reading Dr. Miller's CV backwards shows that as early as 1982, by the way, she was an undergraduate then, she was interested in visual presentations of information. And I compliment her on her scholarly vision, pun intended. Over the years, I've worked with Chris on a number of department committees, and from direct observation, I can attest to her deep commitment to discovering the truth of any matter, of truth-telling and clear argument. She models professionalism in her preparation and follow-through, and on her management of committees through the roles of tension reliever, and to be honest, on occasion, provocateur. Her service in governance at all levels of this campus and the CSU, and her belief in sensible, logical, and above all, moral decision-making is what I think most identifies her as progeny of Jack Livingston's legacy. Finally, in considering the nexus of Dr. Miller's teaching, scholarship, and service, I've discovered a rich vein of courage and creativity. Her presentation will teach us and challenge us to think about our careers in higher education as faculty, staff, students, or administration by its genre, stretching, and creative nature. I'm anxious to experience, rather than just listen to, her presentation entitled Higher Education Innovation Meets the Mashup. Please welcome my Professor of Insight, Dr. Christine Miller.
I'm truly honored to be introduced by Dr. Mark Stoner. I'm certain I speak for a lot of people in this room when I say you inspire me, you've made me a better teacher, a better colleague, and a better scholar. You're already missed by a lot of people, and the disappointment of not having you in the office next door is just going to become more acute as that reality sinks in. I also want to thank the Livingston Lecture Selection Committee and the person who nominated me, Dr. Tony Shepard. I didn't have to bribe any of them, so it's all good. But just like any committee around here or any nomination process, it takes time to be involved. and I'm grateful for your service and for the confidence in me that I could stand on the shoulders of giants like Jack Livingston. There are several other giants also in this room, so I wonder if they'll indulge me. Would everyone who's come before me to deliver this lecture please stand? I told you, giants. I also want to thank the students who are here, both those who I've had the pleasure to teach over the years and those I haven't. I and the rest of the faculty do what we do because of you, and that means this award and this lecture exist because of you. We can't forget you in everything we do. I'd also like to thank those who helped in the development of this lecture. I think you'll see later on that this event showcases some incredible student, faculty, and administrative talent in the College of Arts and Letters. I'll acknowledge specific performances later on, but at the outset, I'm grateful for the assistance of Ed Inch, Kimo Ayun, Melinda Wilson-Ramey, Lorelei Bain, Philip Flickinger, Kristen Hamilton-Tudor, and especially Chema Salinas, who each enthusiastically embraced my request for help. I also want to acknowledge the live streaming of this lecture and the ASL interpreter, which are both unprecedented, and also the live tweeting and coverage by Jonathan Ayestas of the State Hornet, the university's student newspaper. See, it's all innovative. Finally, I want to thank my department colleagues, my faculty colleagues from across campus, my staff colleagues, my administrative colleagues, my friends, and most especially my parents, who I think might be watching live streaming. Hi, Dad. And my daughter, Karenna, for all the love and support that has been extended to me over the years. In some ways, this is kind of like the Grammys last night. I'm sure I'm leaving some people out with my thank yous, and if I go on too long, somebody might start playing music to hope I'll get the hint, or Kimo might be put up to this and run on stage.
Yo, Chris, I'm really happy for you, and I'm going to let you finish. But Mark Stoner, he gave the best Livingston lecture ever. The best.
He was a little late on the cue, but I think he did a pretty good Kanye, don't you? Anyway, you understand why I'm doing these thank yous, right? You know that on occasions like this, speakers are expected to thank the people who helped them, and people like Kanye or Kimo have to apologize later for their rude behavior because it's not expected in the situation. For my rhetoric peeps, this means genres constrain discourse. You as my audience have certain expectations, and the situation dictates that I do or say certain things, so I have to stay within the bounds of what is expected from the Livingston lecturer. But I'm going to push the envelope a little bit. I'm going to color outside the lines. I'm going to think outside the box. I'm going to stop using these lousy metaphors and innovate. But first I have to set the table. See what I did there? Lousy metaphor? Never mind. Okay. The first thing I have to do before I can innovate is establish a context. Otherwise, how would you be able to tell if I was being innovative? If you don't have a point of comparison, a point of reference, you don't know if somebody is being innovative or just plain weird. So the context I'm talking about today is higher education. There are so many challenges faced by post-secondary education in California, and I probably don't have to tell you what they are, but I will anyway, briefly. We have to start by acknowledging the state of California's disinvestment in higher education. Between 2008 and 2012, lawmakers cut about $1 billion from the CSU. That's equal to a loss of about 1/3 of the CSU's system's state revenue, while at the same time, there was a major increase in college-ready high school graduates. Since the year 2000, there's been a 64% increase in the number of college-ready high school graduates. And yet, as state revenues plummeted and more students were ready to go to college, budget cuts forced the CSU to cut enrollment and raise tuition. Adjusting for inflation, tuition has nearly tripled for students in the last 20 years. Not surprisingly, when state funding decreases and tuition increases, students go into debt and work more and take longer to get their degree. So now we have a student debt crisis and nursing shortages and teacher shortages, and overall the number of new graduates is not keeping pace with the needs of the state. The Public Policy Institute of California says there's going to be a shortfall of more than 1.1 million college graduates by 2020. That's just 4 years from now. CSU Chancellor Tim White said California faces 2 droughts, one for water and one for a bachelor's educated citizenry. The reaction, you've heard it. It's like a drumbeat. Out, in, 4, out, in, 4, out, in, 4. Get students out more quickly, make room for new students, decrease their debt. It's an efficiency drumbeat that doesn't acknowledge the uniqueness of our students, that doesn't meet them in their authentic lived experiences. I have no problem with increasing graduation rates. There's certainly room for improvement. But when I sat in my kitchen last month and read a Sacramento Bee editorial by former State Controller Steve Wesley calling for the CSU to be more efficient, the dog got a little worried. Because I burst out, "Oh please, that cliche?" All of us have been told for several years now, having endured draconian budget cuts and increased class sizes and slashed mental health services and very little research support and no pay raises, we've been told this is the new normal. You have to do more with less. So we have become more efficient, Mr. Westley, and the rest of your ilk who like to coach us from the bleachers, thinking those of us who are playing our hearts out in the field obviously must not be trying hard enough to win, and you should just yell at us to motivate us. We are more efficient, and one of the key ways we become more efficient is through innovation. Higher ed innovation reminds me of the space race of the 50s and 60s, when John Kennedy set the national agenda to put a man on the moon and committed the resources to do it. Our best and brightest were on it, and it happened. Half a century later, instead of a space race, it's a degree race. Graduate more with less and put our best and brightest on it. We're on it. So, having established the context for what I want to do with the rest of my time, let's look at some innovations in higher education, see what's worked, what hasn't, what's been tried, where the jury is still out, owing to the sometimes glacial pace of change in education. Changes can take months, even years to assess, because we're dealing with people, not widgets. And sometimes you don't know how a teacher or a class or some other educational experience has impacted you until quite a bit later. But we can still look at the nature of the innovation. In higher education, the nature of innovation shouldn't escape its grounding in teaching and learning. There are those who call themselves post-secondary disruption advocates. But in my view, their disruptive approaches aren't worth a hill of beans if they don't stay grounded in teaching and learning models. In that regard, when we talk about quality education, there's nothing really new or disruptive under the sun. And yet, we still innovate. We pull this from here and that from there. We create pilot programs and test them. We identify best practices and scale them up. We integrate platforms, we take deep dives, we move the needle. And we do other things that can be summarized by similar cliches. And when we do these things, we embrace a systems analytic model, wherein a change in one element of the system results in a new gestalt, a new combination of elements that's different and yet echoes what came before. We're comforted by our recognition of those familiar elements, but delight in seeing them repurposed as we experience them in new ways. We flip our classrooms, but there's still a classroom. We teach online, but there's still grading to do. We upload lectures so anyone in the world can watch them, but there are still students. The core of our educational system still includes the fundamental elements of quality instruction. And still, we innovate, because difficult times call for unique approaches, and because we try to build different, hopefully better mousetraps. And we do it because it's the right thing to do. As times change, methods change. So we innovate because we need to keep up. When I started thinking about the innovations I've seen in higher education, especially those justified by this efficiency mantra, it occurred to me that the post-secondary disruption advocates I mentioned earlier are similar to culture warriors. And that got me thinking about Facebook. One of the things I enjoy about Facebook are the memes and other fun things people find to post. In particular, I love mashups. Here's a bit of one so you know what I'm talking about in case you've never heard of it before.
Dope.
I know, you'd rather it went on, but... That was a mashup of Bruno Mars' Uptown Funk with dance scenes from 66 old movies. So mashups are a mixture or fusion of elements from different sources, and I think they can be a form of cultural disruption. They retain the comforting familiarity we crave, the familiarity of the song and the familiarity of the movie clips, while repurposing them to delight us in new ways. In the same way, what I will argue today is that higher education innovations resemble pop culture mashups in 4 domains: philosophical, structural, legislative, and pedagogical. For each domain, I'm going to give you an example of higher education innovations and then suggest pop culture mashups of my own that could be used to innovate. So let's have some fun. The first type of higher education innovation I want to talk about are those in the philosophical realm. What I'm talking about here are philosophies or concepts that guide what we do in higher education. There are 2 that I want to isolate. One is a philosophy espoused by the Chancellor of the CSU, and it has to do with what he calls shared leadership. The other is a more broad-based philosophy of sensitivity and inclusivity that characterizes the nature of higher education institutions. Each, I think, is a mashup of the philosophies that have come before. Beginning first with the philosophy behind Chancellor White's approach to leadership, most of you know that there's a strong tradition in higher ed decision-making called shared governance. It's not just a tradition, though. It's codified in law, specifically the Higher Education Employer-Employee Relations Act, or HERA, which recognizes that joint decision-making and consultation between administration and faculty is essential to the performance of the educational mission. When Dr. White was hired, though, he said he wanted to call it shared leadership because governance has too much of a regulatory or compliance implication, and leadership implies shared ownership. So Chancellor White created a mashup of higher ed philosophy and business philosophy. As noted in a recent statewide Senate resolution, in contrast to the universally accepted principle of shared governance, shared leadership itself is a concept not native to academe, but rather to business settings, wherein the lexicon and practice of team building is more normative than is the practice of governance. So, on the face of it, Chancellor White's mashup might seem a little like that old shared governance waltz, dance to a different uptown funky tune. But he's getting a little pushback on his mashup because shared governance is embedded in law, which means it establishes power structures. Leadership is not embedded in law. Leadership is an attribute or characteristic of those who govern, not a power structure itself. Think about it. I'm sure you can all come up with examples of people who govern and yet don't lead well. And I bet you can also think of leaders who don't govern well. It's not uncommon at all, though, for people to try to fuse business philosophy with higher ed philosophy, and that seems to be what guided this mashup. Sometimes a mashup might seem like a great idea, but it doesn't catch on. It doesn't go viral. I think it's safe to say that the Chancellor's mashup has not gone viral among the faculty. Another philosophical mashup did seem to go viral, though, for a while anyway. It was a fusion of philosophies that had to do with student sensibilities. It featured attempts by campuses to remain bastions of open inquiry and dialogue, while at the same time responding to those who wanted them to be defenders of minority rights. It was 2015, the year America was offended by everything. The mashup here is an attempt to merge philosophies of inclusion and free speech, and the result is innovations such as trigger warnings, safe spaces, and microaggression training. An article in the Atlantic magazine titled "The Coddling of the American Mind" said, "Something strange is happening at America's colleges and universities. A movement is arising to scrub campuses clean of words, ideas, and subjects that might cause discomfort or give offense. Two terms have risen quickly from obscurity into common campus parlance. They've gone viral. Microaggressions are small actions or word choices that don't seem to have malicious intent, but are thought of as a kind of violence anyway. For example, it's a microaggression to ask an Asian American or Latino American, where were you born? It implies that he or she isn't a real American. Trigger warnings are alerts that professors are expected to issue if something in a course might cause a strong emotional response. For example, some students have called for warnings that The Great Gatsby portrays misogyny and physical abuse, so if they're warned about it, students should have students who've been previously victimized by domestic violence can choose to avoid that trigger and not trigger a past trauma. The authors of the Atlantic article have their own label for this mashup. They call it vindictive protectiveness, when campus safe spaces shield people from words or ideas that make them uncomfortable, and they say it's creating a culture in which everyone must think twice before speaking up, lest they face charges of insensitivity, aggression, or worse. The president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University went so far as to write a blog post saying, "This is not a daycare, it's a university." He went on to say that his institution is not a safe place, but a place to learn. So, there's some tension in this philosophical mashup. Some believe universities are doing the right thing when they innovate with safe spaces, trigger warnings, and the like. Others think such innovations are inappropriate in an institution of higher learning. There are good arguments on both sides, perhaps. So, how should a university community decide? I propose a rap battle. Think of it, a mashup of debate with music, and the audience votes. Google rap battles of history or watch the musical Hamilton, and you'll get the idea. I suggest to you that rap battles can combat groupthink. They can be a way to test an idea, to look at all facets of it, and to figure out if it's the best way to innovate. For example, President Nelson has identified improving graduation rates as a top campus priority. So he created a new position, Executive Director of University Initiatives and Student Success, otherwise known as the Graduation Czar. But what if, before he announced that decision, we all heard the pros and cons during a rap battle? It might go something like this.
But normally there'd be two people in a rap battle, but big deal. So, in case you didn't catch the president's oration, he was telling it like it is. It got a standing ovation. Frustration, but full of affirmation. Finally, somebody doing something about the rate of graduation. Instead of trying to play the blame game, he made a simple plain claim. Students yelling Mayday, today's a day. The state governor in a raging blaze, unenforceable to raise the stage on that Mayday. We need us all, create a star, raise the bar, move the needle, help our people to complete what they have started. Listen up, stingers up, learn it nation. This is a foundation on which together we build greatness. We will improve the graduation rates. It'll be best through a new sensation. Our salvation, much needed elevation. Let's improve our students' lives, our community, and our nation. Stingers up. Alright, so we have the rebuttal here. I the words but can't respect the presentation. That's why I did not stand for the standing ovation. Affirmation but no motivation. Thinking that the plan will increase the graduation. Raise when you say there will not be any blame game. But it's the same game, same lighter, same flame, same fire, same administrative fire. You need to think with the you gave us subpar without a shot fired. If you want to move the needle, we don't need a fifth tire. We're sick of waiting, we don't need another way for our students to pay the price for representation, representation, funky delegation. The people's revolution is the movement that you're facing. Think we're taking one of the czar's faith and think back 100 years to the former Russian nation overthrown. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Miller.
That was Tyler Wyckoff, a graduate student in communication studies. Let's give it up. I think he would make a great addition to President Nelson's cabinet. Just think of the student talent that could be involved in our decision-making on this campus if we embrace the rap battle and mash it up with philosophical discussions of what to do as a university. So that's my first modest proposal for innovating higher ed decision-making, rap battles. I'm going to move now to my second category of mashups in higher ed innovation, structural fusions. Here, too, I'm going to provide a couple of examples and then offer one of my own. So let me explain what I mean by a structural mashup. What I'm talking about are organizational structures that are typically kept separate, but innovators fuse them together to create new structures. And there's two examples that I'm going to discuss. The first has to do with partnerships between colleges and high schools, and the second one relates to reorganizing university functions. Turning to the first type, there's a trend that's catching on that mashes up K-12 and higher ed structures. High schools and colleges usually operate in silos, but some innovations feature breaking down or at least bridging those silos. For example, there's a push in California for what's called linked learning, an approach that blends career-based learning, real-world experience, and academics together as high schools and colleges collaborate on creating pathways to career and/or college. In pathways such as these, high school students take college classes or earn college credit before they've even graduated high school. Another example of breaking down silos is what's called the Long Beach College Promise. Here's how it works. All fourth graders in the Long Beach Unified School District, together with their parents, tour Long Beach City College. In fifth grade, they all tour CSU Long Beach. That gets them primed to think about college. In sixth grade, the specific outreach efforts become even more targeted, and they start getting information about financial aid and careers. When they're juniors, they take an early assessment exam, and if they don't do well, they get math and English remediation so that they meet CSU entrance requirements. Then they're guaranteed a year of free tuition at Long Beach City College and guaranteed admission to Long Beach State, which is not easy to get into. That's really an actual promise, and it goes both ways. According to the Atlantic magazine, middle school students and their parents are asked to sign a pledge to do things like show up to school daily, do their homework, and ask for help from teachers in subjects they find challenging. In exchange for their efforts, Long Beach promises guaranteed college access regardless of family income, and the results have been stunning. In terms of my argument that this is a structural mashup, the key here is the fusion of structures in innovative ways. In describing how the silos have been bridged to create new structures, the president of Long Beach State explained, "We communicate all the time. No turf, no bureaucracies, just building and evaluating programs with the goal of removing barriers and supporting student success." An editorial writer for the New York Times said, "The willingness of educators from pre-K to PhD to shelve their egos and do right by the community makes all the difference." There's another kind of structural mashup that I want to talk about too. It's the merging of structures within universities themselves that have traditionally been parallel but separate. It's the combining of the academic affairs side of the house with the student affairs side of the university house. At the Chancellor's office, for instance, when they needed to replace Executive Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, they changed the nature of the job and instead hired an Executive Vice Chancellor for Academic and Student Affairs. This kind of move acknowledges that student success entails looking at the entire student. It involves understanding the impact that personal issues can have on academics and vice versa. For instance, if a student becomes homeless, how can we expect that student to succeed in his classes if he doesn't know where he's sleeping that night? Or what about last month's national poll results that revealed 3/4 of African American students keep their feelings about the difficulties of college to themselves and don't get the mental health services they need? Then there's the issue of food insecurity. The College and University Food Bank Alliance says food insecurity has increasingly become an issue on college campuses and can pose a significant barrier to student success. Food insecurity cuts across all demographic statuses, enrollment levels, and geographic locations. Empty cupboards and scraping by are a way of life for far too many students, and these stressors affect student success, learning, grades, graduation, time to degree. Addressing food insecurity on campus serves both a human service and an educational need. It's this acknowledgement of the whole student, of the mind-body relationship, that's fostered structural innovation in higher education. As one Sacramento State student put it, once your stomach starts growling, you're not thinking. So our campus food pantry is a local innovation spearheaded by the Associated Students Incorporated and filling a critical need. It bridges the divide between what happens in and outside of the classroom. The more we can meet students' physical and mental health needs, the better they will perform in our classrooms. It's as simple as that. And it justifies merging the structures of academic and student affairs. So, innovations like the food pantry deserve our support. They rely mostly on donations, and to get donors, they need to compel people to give. That's not an easy task, especially once the publicity dies down and the novelty wears off. Maybe then, our ASI innovators need their own innovation. That means it's time for my second modest proposal for a mashup, a music video. I got this idea from a music video of a song by Usher called Chains. The song is about racial injustice, and Usher teamed up with an interactive video streaming service called Tidal to create a video called Don't Look Away. What happens is you go to the website and enable your computer's camera. It then identifies where your eyes are, and if you look away from the screen while the video is playing, the song stops until you look back. Here's a brief demonstration. Dr. Chema Salinas is going to show us how it works. And he looked away again. Thank you. The compelling thing about this is that you have to look these victims in the face, get to know their face, and thus yourself face these examples of racial injustice. I think we could do the same kind of thing to get people to face student homelessness or student mental health issues. In the present case, to support our campus food pantry, we could create a music video about food insecurity. And if we did, if we added it to an interactive streaming video service later, it might look something like this. I want to acknowledge Dr. Chema Salinas, who produced this mashup of a song called College by a group called Animal Collective. Provost Lee, if you'd like to hire Dr. Salinas to produce music videos to highlight campus innovations, I would recommend him highly. Or if you could see your way clear to allow our department to convert his job from adjunct to tenure track, that would be awesome. By the way, Chema is a former student of mine. He's made it Sac State. I'm going to turn now to my third category of higher education innovations, those coming out of the California legislature. Lawmakers love innovation, and their legislation resembles a mashup when it features the merging or fusion of functions in different realms of education. One realm involves the mashing up of the master plan for California higher education, and another realm mashes up preparation and transfer. So I'm going to give you brief examples here. In 1960, the master plan and its enabling legislation established a three-part structure made up of public research universities, the UCs, regional comprehensive universities, the CSUs, and open access community colleges. The UCs could offer degrees up to the doctoral level, the CSUs could offer bachelor's and master's degrees, and the community colleges could offer associate's degrees. Those distinctions have been broken down by more recent legislation, however. In 2005, a law was passed that allowed the CSU to offer the EDD, or Education Doctorate, and in 2010, CSU got the authority to offer independent doctorates in physical therapy and nursing practice. Similarly, in 2014, the community colleges got the legislative green light to test out offering bachelor's degrees. So the master plan has been mashed up. What used to be separate and distinct functions of each system have been fused together, and some critics go so far as to say that the master plan is dead. Personally, I wouldn't go that far. Even though the legislature has broken down some of the distinctions among the segments, I think the master plan remains as a guiding document, if nothing else. At any rate, lawmakers have actively broken down other distinctions in education as well. Legislation has made the boundaries more permeable between high school and college, and between community college and the CSU. For instance, the Student Transfer Achievement Reform Act, also known as SB 1440 or the STAR Act, has streamlined transfer by guaranteeing admission into the CSU for any community college student earning an associate's degree for transfer. There are nearly 2,000 transfer degree options now, and around 11,500 students have earned those degrees in the 2014 school year. I'm calling the STAR Act and other legislation like it innovative because it breaks down those barriers and requires the merging of different education domains. This is happening in other areas besides transfer too, such as the legislation that mandated all three higher ed systems create an online library for open educational resources in order to encourage faculty to adopt high-quality, affordable, or free textbooks. This is a true mashup of the three segments, the publishing industry and online educational materials, to create something that has never existed before. There's one last domain I want to discuss where the legislature would come in. So far, it hasn't happened yet, but there's so much buzz about this topic that it seems like it's just going to be a matter of time before a legislator decides to innovate here, and that is competency-based education. There's some pretty heavy lobbying going on by the for-profit sector of higher education, and outfits like Western Governors University are constantly trying to get lawmakers to clear the way for it to take off in public education. There are lots of reasons to be cautious about such an approach, but those reasons might not be understood easily because the issues are very complex. How then can we go about explaining these complexities to legislators who like things fairly simple? How can we get them to pay attention to and then understand some of the arguments against competency-based education in the face of intense lobbying by those who stand to profit from it? That brings me to my third modest proposal for innovating in the legislative realm: dance. There's a competition every year called Dance Your PhD, and it's designed to answer that age-old question, so what's your research about? Scientists and social scientists submit YouTube videos explaining what they're up to in a way that doesn't make people's eyes glaze over. Imagine trying to grasp a dissertation titled Odd-Z Transactinide Compound Nucleus Reactions Including the Discovery of Bohrium-260. Well, Science Magazine has our back. For the last 8 years, they've sponsored a competition whose premise is explained by one of their writers in a TED Talk. Let's hear him describe it. So you notice the dancers who were moving around on the stage while he was narrating, right? I think we can adopt the same kind of strategy to explain a complex concept to legislators through dance as well. Instead of Dance Your PhD, we can call it Dance Your Higher Ed Policy. So to give you an idea of what that might look like, a member of the award-winning Sacramento State debate team, Shay Khan, is going to explain some of the arguments against competency-based education, while two of our very talented students majoring in dance, Emily Vang and Brenda Ho, dance this higher ed policy.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. About a week ago, the innovations columnist for Washington Post wrote an article comparing college to your cable TV package. He quoted a consultant who said, "Schools are plowing money into new dorms and sports stadiums, and students are paying for channels they have no use for. You really just want the accounting degree, and you also get the football team alongside it," the consultant said. So while TV junkies have cheap alternatives such as Netflix spring up, there are no Ubers or Airbnbs for the higher education space. That's where lawmakers can pave the way for what's called competency-based education, or CBE, a model of learning that rewards students based on what they know, rather than how many hours they've spent in a classroom. It allows students to use prior learning, and all they need to know and do is prove the mastery of the material. Proponents say this approach saves time and money, and it's this efficiency that has policymakers excited. But is this a good idea? Should lawmakers require universities to abandon the credit hour, which is based on the amount of time that student butts are in classroom seats? Stephen Ward, a professor of sociology, does not think so. Ward says, "In the rush to emphasize marketable skills over deep liberal knowledge, proponents of CBE are forcing students into a knowledge-less version of liberal learning in order to hurry things along and not get in the way of their job training. Despite the rhetoric of serving the underserved and closing the skills gap, they are responsible for generating new hierarchies of cheap fast food style education from those who receive a quality one. In this model," Ward says, "students in a more elite institution will go on receiving broad liberal training and having access to powerful knowledge as a core part of their university experience, while those at lower tier public institutions will be loaded up with watered down, box-checking skills and vague competencies to be provided by standardized online platforms. In the market-centered spirit of our times, the move to CBE is presented as a matter of consumer choice, where wily student consumers and their parents comparison shop at knowledgeable malls and select the educational experience that provides more bang for the buck. What this all means," Ward notes, "is that CBE is not just a statement about the future of higher education. It's about students with different income levels who are forced into cheap, cut-rate imitations of degrees because they can't afford to receive a quality, broad-based education. What a shame. The University of Netflix would be a bad public policy.
That was awesome. I'd never seen it. That was great. Thank you. My thanks to Shay, Emily, and Brenda, as well as the debate and dance programs, for showing us what this mashup might look like. I contend that watching and listening to our students will have a much bigger impact on legislators than anything faculty or administrators might have to say. So maybe we can convince Shay, Emily, and Brenda to take their show down the road to the Capitol. Okay, so I've covered philosophical, structural, and legislative innovations. The last one I'll discuss very briefly is pedagogical. These are the mashups of traditional ways of teaching with other means of delivering content. And there are two that I'm going to isolate: the use of contingent faculty and online instruction. By contingent faculty, I mean part-timers. The proportion of full-time tenure-track faculty to part-time faculty is a measure of what's called tenure density. Historically, until the mid-1990s, tenure density in the CSU was over 80%. The most recent figures had it around 56%. That's a 25% drop in those who work full-time, as opposed to those who are often called freeway flyers. So this innovation mashes up the education domain with the business domain by promoting the use of part-time workers to save money over full-timers. It's a business decision, really, not a decision based on what's in the best interest of the students or the institution. Don't get me wrong, contingent faculty are outstanding teachers, but the institution does not make the same commitment to them as it does to tenure-track faculty, just like a business does not make the same commitment to part-time workers as it does to full-timers. It's all about bang for the buck. So is online instruction. Hailed by some as the magic bullet that will increase student access while decreasing the cost of instruction, it's resulted in such failed experiments as MOOCs, or massive online open courses. By massive, we're talking about tens of thousands of students signing up for the same class. I call MOOCs a failed experiment because the completion rate of students signing up for these classes is less than 10%. Let that sit with you for a minute. Less than 10% of the students finish these massive online classes. Now, of course, not all online teaching is MOOC-based, but MOOCs are clearly an example of the kind of innovative mashup in pedagogy I'm talking about. But I need to make another very important argument here. In my view, what makes for quality and effective instruction of adult learners has been clear for a very long time now, even going back to the sophists of ancient Greece. When we put quality front and center, the scholarship of teaching and learning tells us how critical it is to have dedicated, disciplined experts using best pedagogical practices to enhance student learning. Teachers matter, and the way they teach matters. It's always been that way, and I will argue that's the way it should be. Teachers transform lives. Unfortunately, some innovations obstruct good teaching. MOOCs are one of them. If I ever hear a student say that a MOOC changed his or her life, I'll retire on the spot. Teachers change lives, not innovative delivery platforms. So, instead of offering you another mashup of my own to illustrate this pedagogical innovation, I'm going to suggest the opposite to you. My position is that we should unmash pedagogy and get back to what we know works: professors teaching students. There's an amazing dynamic created in face-to-face instruction. We may not be able to see it, but that doesn't mean it isn't there. There's so much going on in the minds of those involved. It reminds me of a movie that came out last July called Inside Out. It's a Pixar animated film, And its hook is that the main character's thoughts and emotions are personified by characters in their heads. So we can see what's happening on the inside that leads to the behaviors on the outside. Take a look. So that trailer shows you that two separate but connected stories are being told, the outside story and the inside emotional state. I think this is a great allegory for teaching. What we see is the outside story, but what we don't see is the inside emotional and intellectual state. Let's look at that same scene again, as edited by Jordan Hazan, who took the entire film, it's a film of about an hour and 45 minutes, and removed all those inside scenes, and it's now a film of 15 minutes. So here's that same scene without the inside scenes.
So, how was the first day of school?
It was fine, I guess. I don't know.
Ahem.
Ah, so, Riley, how was school?
School was great, all right?
Riley, is everything okay?
Riley, I do not like this new attitude.
What is your problem? Just leave me alone.
Listen, young lady, I don't know where this disrespectful attitude came from.
Yeah, well, just shut up!
That's it. Go to your room. Now.
So if you take away the hook of the film like Jordan Hazan did, if you only look at what's happening from the outside, you're left with a story that's still understandable, but woefully incomplete. I don't know about you, but I'd much rather watch the first film than the second. That's because the real movie accounts for each person's experience rather than dismisses it. And that's precisely what pedagogy needs to do. Account for each person's experience in the teaching and learning environment. When we dismiss as irrelevant what's on the inside, we're left with the outer shell. We need to unmash teaching so we get back to what we know changes people from the inside out. A high-quality education grounded in superior face-to-face instruction. That's what's transformative. That's what changes lives. That's what innovates. So today I've given you examples of innovations in higher education in the domains of philosophy, structure, legislation, and pedagogy. And with the help of some wonderful students and faculty, I've suggested some mashups that could disrupt higher education in good ways. What's left is for me and you to thank everyone involved in this presentation. So if I've said your name today, or if you've interrupted this presentation, come on up here, please come on stage. There's food in the back. Thank you for coming.
Another interruption. We do have a special presentation, 2 special presentations to make to Dr. Miller. First of all, can we give it up again for So in recognition for your outstanding intellectual leadership here at California State University, it is my privilege to present this to you on this occasion of the delivery of the John C. Livingston Annual Faculty Lecture 2015-2016. Thank you. More interruption. I think this lecture was worthy of this token of appreciation that is contained in this white envelope. Dr. Miller, it's my pleasure.
Thank you so much for coming. It really means a lot to me. I appreciate all your support.